All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Flux Dev Meeting later in the day edition. Later for me, anyway. All right. Let's have a look at the agenda. It looks like, Kingdom's just about to add something, but otherwise, there's just the standard repeating things. Anyone else got Stacy? You might have an upcoming meeting to put on there. I'm not sure. Chris, Jonathan, if you have anything to put on there, or some touchy, if you got anything to talk about, whack it on the agenda, and then I'll bring it up in a second when we get to it. Okay, the first thing on the repeating items is me talking about image update automation. I do not have anything more to report on that. The state is that the sort of release candidate, if you like, for B1 Beta 1, which is where backward compatibility starts, was released, I think, in the last controller, image automation controllers release. So it is available now, I expect. I don't actually know that because I was away at the time, but that's what I think is correct. And the next step is to basically figure out how much time we want to give it in the field to make sure that it is good enough to be promoted to be V1 Beta 1. That's still the case. That was the case last meeting. That's still the case. And none of that figuring out has happened, but it might do next week. Okay, so that's image automation. There's also a standing item for docs updates from Alison and Daniel, but neither Alison nor Daniel are actually here. So we might have to skip that one. But let me see if there was anything from last week about that. That is worth. There was some stuff that was expected to be done by the end of that week, but I have no idea whether it was done or not. So we may have to wait until next week for an update to that one. Sorry, folks. Okay, wow, cracking through things here. Kingdom, do you want to talk about your PR, Jenkins and Flux?
Certainly.
Cool.
So there's a PR open. It's website number 274. It's linked in the agenda. It is a new use cases guide for Jenkins and Flux, and it is short compared to my last use cases guide. It has only one code example that links out to a repo where some ancillary things are. You're expected to bring your own Docker file. It runs tests, but you're expected to bring your own tests. And it is open and ready for review. I've tested it. I think it's ready to merge, but it would be good to get some feedback from people who use Jenkins or are interested in trying to use Jenkins. It should be good for both audiences. It doesn't assume a lot of Jenkins knowledge, but it does assume that you have a way of getting a Jenkins instance of some kind. It doesn't make too many assumptions about how that's done. It will kind of assume that you're on Kubernetes, but leaving room for the possibility that maybe you're not. The Jenkins file example won't work if you're not, but all the advice should generally be good. It uses the Kubernetes agent, so it schedules a pod for testing.
Kubernetes agent for Jenkins. That's
correct.
A Jenkins
There's an agent that runs jobs as Jenkins schedules them, and you can feed it pod definitions or any other Kubernetes YAML if you want. So it uses a Jenkins Docker privileged pod with a host path mount, all the stuff you don't want to do. It mentions security concerns that you should absolutely isolate CI from CD And since you're doing that, this is probably not something to worry too much about, but that you need to be mindful of that. So hopefully it's pretty good content wise, and I'm open to any feedback that anyone has, including cut this whole section, whatever you want.
Cool. Is it worth doing a little bit of outreach on CNCF Slack channels and stuff to see, just to tell people who might be using Jenkins? I'm sure there are a bunch of people in the user community.
Yeah, I'll do a post
to check it out
on the Flux channel today.
Cool, good one. Even after it's merged, actually, we can keep kind of pointing people at it. So. Wonderful.
Yeah, it sounds like people are reading the manifest generation guide, which is shocking to me because it's enormous. But I'm getting feedback about it from people who have read it. So,
well, that shock will subside as you do more of this kind of thing, I think. All right. Stacey, do you want to tell us about a meetup?
We don't have any meetups scheduled at the moment.
Not a meetup, a deadline.
Yeah, we do have GitOps days coming up, but otherwise, just a reminder that if anyone is submitting a Flux talk to KubeCon, the CFP closes this Sunday at just before midnight Pacific time. So make sure you submit those. And yeah, GitOps days. We'll have many Flux talks at GitOps days. So come and check that out as well. That's it.
When is GitOps days? You've got it down there. June 9th, 10th. Okay. Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stacey. Hi, Lee. Lee, if you have stuff to talk about, whack it on the agenda.
Sure thing. I just came to tune in.
Cool. I might ask you about multi-tenancy, because I don't actually know where that's up to, and I'm sure other people may be interested as well, because I know you are working on it, right? Yeah.
Yes. So I've been kind of stuck in my own way on implementing it, still just fumbling through the kubectl test suite. I actually met with Santochi because she reached out to me saying she was interested in helping with the work. And that was some of the most productive time that we've had on it. So I was able to kind of just have a one-on-one session where we drew the architecture up, went through the reasoning so that she would have the full context on why we're doing things. And then we did a code dive into customized controller and all of the places that we're going to need to make changes. So the next time that we meet to work on this, we'll be producing some GitHub issues for those atomic changes. There are not that many for the customized controller portion of the POC. And I still am rebasing the kubectl patch that I have that does simplify its usage for the in-cluster impersonation stuff. So that's working, and a custom build of kubectl can be used without any workarounds. Does that make sense? Is it clear enough?
Yes, that's cool. I completely failed to actually get it all down in the meeting notes.
Yeah.
But I can go back to the recording and later and put it down.
Okay. I can go ahead and write some notes in so that it's not just on you.
Oh, even better. Yes, brilliant. Thank you. I forgot at the top of the meeting to ask for a volunteer to take notes, and belatedly realized that it then falls to me to do so. Whoops. Okay. All right. So I think we are at any other business. Would anyone like to mention something they've been working on, or something they would like to work on? Give a few seconds. Dan, who's just arrived, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be cool. If you are happy to lurk, that's also cool.
Sorry, I always look, and so I missed the first bit of the meeting. Unfortunately, I was a bit late today. Hi, my name's Dan Slinky. I'm a SRE at Cookpad. We're a Flux V1 user, and kind of hoping to adopt V2 at some point. We have it in trial at the moment. So this is my opportunity just really to kind of lurk and see what you guys are up to. I find it really useful just to kind of get a quick insight as to where the project's at, you know, what's coming next. It's really good to know what's going to happen in the next releases. So
yeah.
Hi.
Cool. Well, you chose a good meeting to turn up to, because you have a bunch of people here and a lot of time in which we can answer questions for you, because we've actually got through the agenda that we set ourselves.
If I could cut in, Michael, sorry.
Of course.
Chris Sanders, Dan at Microsoft, along with Jonathan Innes, we're working with Lee to implement Flux V2 in our Azure offering. I'd be very interested to know if you keep track of the migration story from Flux 1 to Flux 2, because there will be many customers going that route, and I'm sure, you know, Michael and Lee and them are keeping info too, but any insights and gotchas and best practices you come across would be really great for the community to know about. But glad to meet you.
That's a very good call, Chris. Yeah, I mean, the more kind of case study type information we get about people migrating, the better, because that helps everyone. Dan, if you don't mind talking a bit more, can I ask you what sort of things are you running into that are maybe holding you back, or that you have concerns about with Flux V2?
So no major concerns at the moment, other than just waiting for image automation to kind of reach production ready. So that's a killer feature that we're using with our teams in Flux V1. Yes, we could probably migrate to it now and ride out the bumps a little bit. But one, it's probably best that we wait for production ready. And the other thing that we're kind of waiting for is being able to place image policies alongside local customizations, and not everything stuck inside Flux system namespace, for example.
Got it.
I am aware of Stefan's contribution on that side. We're kind of just waiting to see that get merged and see where that goes, because that will make maintaining all of the image automation across multiple teams a lot easier for us, because teams can then maintain their own policies, and we can just maintain the infrastructure for them.
And by Stefan's contribution, you mean the PR where you could create an image automation that applied to lots of different namespaces?
Correct. Yes, there's that extra flag which says watch these, if I remember right, it's watch these namespaces, or but yeah, it's the one where you can place your image policies in any namespace and they will be picked up.
Okay.
Dan, does just as somebody who's probably quite knowledgeable about RBAC and some tenancy, does that referencing across namespaces, would you like to see the ability to wrangle that with RBAC, like prevent a particular image update automation from like referencing namespaces it shouldn't be allowed to?
The short answer from us is no, because that's not something we actively do at the moment. However, if that kind of functionality came along, then yes, because it would harden that kind of area a little bit more. But
so if it was there, you would probably use it.
We'd probably use it, but that wouldn't be a blocker for us at the moment if it wasn't. So.
Okay. You would just ignore that part of the surface because it's not that consequential. Okay, cool.
This is really useful. Thanks for agreeing to be interviewed, Dan.
All right. I'm quite excited about Flux V2, if I'm honest. The only other thing that is a slight niggle at the moment is So in Flux v1, we have a step in our kind of CI CD workflow that we will generate the manifests on our master branch and then generate them on the PR. So then we can have a kind of a diff of actually what's been generated between the two versions. But because in Flux v2, you don't necessarily know which customization is going to be applied, that little bit of the workflow needs going to be interesting for us to kind of work through and work out how we kind of approach that. Because it's not immediately obvious where, when you raise a PR, for example, or somebody in the team raises a PR, it's not immediately obvious, okay, if you're changing this customization base, how are the outputted manifests actually going to change? Because that's not visible to you at this point, because you don't know which overlay is being generated. So there's kind of a bit of gluing and tooling that we're going to have to kind of work out. But
so could I paraphrase that as it's harder to see the effect that changes are going to have because there are kind of levels of indirection. Like yes. This change might be to a customization which has other sync definitions, which blah blah blah, etc. So you, yeah.
Can you help me understand the problem statement a little more clearly?
Sure. I can. Can I show you this? Yeah, let me share my screen. There's nothing particularly sensitive in what I'm about to show you. And we're not being recorded, so that's fine. Bear with me.
We are being recorded, and this gets posted publicly, so just be careful.
Then in that case, I'm not going to show it. Okay,
Sorry
so in Flux V, that's okay. In Flux V1, our structure is that we have a bunch of overlays, and each overlay corresponds to an environment. Okay, so when we raise a PR, we build each of the overlays in our CI process, and we output what the overlay would generate, the outputted manifests. And that allows us to kind of generate a diff between what's on master and what's coming through the PR. So we've got a pretty good idea of what's going to be applied to the cluster. In Flux v2, right, that generation happens inside the cluster, as it were. So we can't have visibility on what's the outputted manifest going to look like on the PR. Yeah, it's going to happen later on. You have to have something in our toolchain that is aware of every single overlay that is likely to be built. And we just haven't worked out how we're likely to do that just yet.
I think we have an issue for this, and some of the proposed comments have been to create a client-side inflator for customization objects. Yeah, it's really a bit unfortunate because there's so much non-trivial and like additional behavior that we've built into the customization object in order to support the use cases that are not supported by the tools. Mainly the ones that are super non-standard are env subst and our own inline patch API, then the secrets decoding from SOPs. So those three things are all non-standard customized behavior that are dependent on our API. And then it's like referencing a source in a different way than an actual customization. It is ideally it'd probably be good enough to ignore the SOPs decoding thing for the debugging use case, right? And then maybe if you had admin access to the cluster, you could enable a flag that fetches the secret to do that thing. But I can see it being useful for bootstrap use cases and things. Like say you have a secret, encrypted thing that installs CNI and you want to use the customization object to install CNI first before you spin up the Flux cluster. then now you can have a single config, but you just bootstrap the part that you needed before Flux can run. But yeah, having some sort of client-side tool that allows you to inflate the source based off of the specific customized reconcile behavior. There are some challenges there. Some of it is code organization. A lot of this is not documented, so it's a good thing that this call is recorded so we can reference it. But yeah, some of it's code organization, you know, that reconciler lives in the customized controller repository. That ability to inflate that thing should probably live on the CLI side, or, you know, maybe there's a different story here about introspection. Maybe it's possible to build the catalog from, you don't really want to do it after it's already been applied to the cluster, unfortunately. So it's like, yeah, instructing customized controller to be able to write a manifest to some bucket or something would really be a very runtime specific solution that doesn't sound attractive to me and comes with all kinds of security issues. I think that like trying to have a client side way to inflate these things, even if it maybe you have to port forward to source controller in order to actually get the thing, would be an improvement, you know. And then maybe instead of like port forwarding to source controller, you know, maybe the basic one is actually you just like place the directory on the client side tool, similar to Helm template. We're effectively looking for like a Helm template solution, right? Where that stuff used to happen inside of Tiller, now it happens client side. But so dry run is very similar to template, but that's kind of the problem.
Yeah.
And there is an issue for it, or I think a discussion on the Flux 2 forum for it. If
so there's actually two problems. There's the expansion, but that's sort of the easy one. The other one is that lots of things in GitOps Toolkit encourage you to chain customizations and Helm releases together, because lots of features depend like on you doing that. So what you actually want is the transitive closure of all the things that would get synced if you started here. So if this syncs some other stuff, then whatever those sync as well, and then whatever those sync. So that's which is a much harder problem.
Yeah, that seems a little bit less difficult, because you can, like, I could write a JQ program that grabs all of the customization names from Flux template output, right? Flux customization template output. And if there are child customizations in there, I can just run the params for those. You have to kind of know where the directories are, but it's not super hard to like make a make file that templates each one of the customizations that you have.
Well, it's strictly harder than the other problem because it includes doing the other, doing the expansion.
Yes, but it's like that's sort of like a more of a usability thing as opposed to like a technical limitation. Like that's descending the tree, which I agree is non-trivial. But like I can see us having the first thing and people would already be very satisfied. Because the structure of the customizations is in the repo. Somebody can like easily make a make file that says, hey, these are my customizations I care about for this use case. Let's do a quick template into these different directories. I know that these output directories are going to be applied in this kind of logical order, you know.
Right, but it's not just customizations in the same repo, is it? It's you might create other sources and then
yes,
so on and so forth, or go to Helm charts and then expand those, and those Helm charts might have other bits and pieces. So,
and that's probably where having a mode of like interacting with the live cluster to find the sources if they exist might ease things, because then you wouldn't have to actually find the directories on your local system. You could pipe them over the network potentially. Are you following me there?
kind of.
Like your
I'm not sure it's as
client
easy as
could
that.
connect to your cluster's source controller and find all of the actual sources that have been pulled into a live cluster and template on those live things rather than
If those things have been created, yes.
rather
But if
than
you
put the
added a new
onus
one,
on
then
the
you wouldn't be able
user
to do that.
to like supply which repositories are in which directories on my file system.
Yes, I don't think that would be workable. I agree.
But that's actually the MVP though, right? Is like connecting to a source controller has a runtime requirement. But ideally you should be able to do this Helm template stuff by providing a source that fits the use case. There's other debugging things in here, right? Like what if I pipe this source at this branch versus this source at this branch? It gives somebody like some indirection locally to debug what the difference is between how things inflate. But if you're really interested in the sources inside the cluster and you want to do this for an entire descent tree, then like that could really reduce your workload if you're like, hey, what is this doing right now? If like based off of the source in the cluster.
Yeah, that would cover some use cases, yeah.
I guess
But not all of
if
them.
you're willing to, as part of the inflation process, actually pull the sources with source controller logic on your machine, right? Like that's another step beyond.
Yeah.
At that point, you
it
might
is.
as well just deploy Flux, you know, in a test cluster. But
yeah, it's a tricky one. It's more that the problem just doesn't exist with Flux v1 because you have a single Git repo. You're doing kind of one thing, so you don't run into it because you don't have any of this kind of indirection. You can't, like, I mean, I suppose you might get into a situation where you are deploying Flux v1 that itself deploys a configuration for Flux v1 to do something else, but you don't really expect to be able to see the whole effect of that. You know, that's much more of an obvious.
yeah, normally as a
expect that to be
platform
a kind of a loop.
engineer, I would have like all of the Git repos that I care about, or if I don't have one, then I'll check it out onto my machine, right? I'll pull it. And then when I want context about config based off of what that Git repo maps to in the actual runtime environment, like I go into that repository and run commands on that repo, like on that local file system. So I'm seeing like the MVP of just saying, inflate this customization as if my working directory or a directory that I pass, right, is the context, is the source. Then that would probably be like meet the majority of the needs, and it wouldn't be that hard to build because we just need to take the reconcile logic that inflates the customization. It doesn't need any Kubernetes client stuff. It doesn't need RBAC stuff. It just needs to produce the template. It just needs to operate on a local directory that's passed to it. And then, you know, I can write a bash for loop and go through everything and template all the customizations I see, or use a makefile or something. And that would be like a huge step up from the current situation where right now you can only really validate what happens after customized controller has actually applied those things to the cluster or failed to do so. And it wouldn't decrypt secrets by default, you know, and you could add that feature in, maybe, you know, be local secrets, you can introspect them.
Decrypt them if you have the keys locally, sort of thing.
Yeah, that could work. You know, if you have the SOPs keys themselves, you could try. But that again should be optional because I'm usually not interested in seeing the contents of the secrets necessarily.
True.
Yeah. And if the secret's contents did change, I can still see it in the encrypted output. Just not, I don't need to see the bytes themselves.
Yeah, right. You can see that it's changed, but yes,
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. Yeah, the reason I brought up the indirection thing is that I'm trying to do something maybe not very standard with Flux. And as soon as you get to the point where you are syncing some configuration that itself has customizations and sources, it becomes very, very difficult to wrap your head around it. But GitOps Toolkit strongly encourages you to do this, because that's the only way to get certain things done.
Yeah, I find myself
mentioned
like in some weird mental loops sometimes where I'm like, okay, this directory is for this customization, and then things that are created inside that directory need to CD out of it. Like they need to get out of it in order to have its own isolated path. And like even that is a little bit difficult to really reason about, like as you split up this repository in your head.
Yeah.
But I think Stefan and I have also produced a fair share of non-trivial repo structures with, there's kind of two genres. Like there's one where you can split up the customization within like the same folder, and then there's one where you can, or sorry, there's two genres of dependency. There's one where the customizations are all created at the same time and they reference each other. And then there's one where the customization is only created as a result of a downstream one. And I think that these two accomplishing sort of the same thing, but being very different in terms of their runtime behavior, like one paints the graph immediately and one like is like lays out different stages of the graph like as things run successfully. I don't know, there's definitely a huge actual difference there, despite them both being dependency related, and I'm not sure if both patterns are good or bad. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in a way, there's multiple ways of accomplishing it, which is not always a good situation.
Yes. Yeah, because you can get the cluster into a state where maybe you would expect that there would be customizations, but something has failed. So you're actually at a previous like or earlier topology of the graph. Anyway, this is getting quite.
Yeah. We're rabbit holing somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that stuff's like super hard, and I think all of that conversation really relates to what Dan is talking about, which is that like you can really describe powerful and non-trivial rollouts of your declarations from a dependency management perspective, from a source composition perspective, and there are no client-side tools right now that allow you to easily like repeat what is described in the Flux APIs in a client-side way.
Yeah, not very predictable.
That's the thing, you want to know like what manifests are going to be applied to my Kubernetes cluster by the by the controllers, right? That's
Yes.
because right now most of us can work that out, right? But we're passing this to team members that they're simply going to change one line of YAML somewhere in a customization base, and they just want to have some confidence that, you know, this thing that they've changed isn't going to completely annihilate the cluster, right? And giving them that feedback in V1 is fairly trivial to do and is almost invaluable for them. We just haven't quite got to the point where we can replicate that in V2 just yet. So
yeah, some folks, this was really just, it's not that this didn't exist or it wasn't possible to get into this situation with V1, but the kinds of users were not very common because it was harder to do. So you would be in this exact same situation if you had a Flux base that people would use their Flux to install child Fluxes. Some folks do this to create independent service accounts and do multi-repo composition and stuff with Flux One. It's not common, but that's basically where the design kind of inspiration fed into Flux 2 to make it really easy to do this kind of thing. And that kind of has that same debugging problem, is just wrangling that much config. In some ways, you're still in a better place because otherwise your cluster would just look like how it is described in the Flux repo, except you just have no idea how it got there. like some people have scripts that are repeatable, things like that, but I often find myself like stumbling upon a repository that just has a bunch of directories, and it's not no readme even sometimes. But yeah, I think making the Flux reconcile, at least in pieces, client side repeatable is a valuable thing to be working on. I would almost say it's a high priority thing. It's just that I don't know if anybody on the like kind of core team of contributors is going to be able to commit to solving that problem immediately. Certainly, if you have opinions about how it should be done, I think that the MVP is take a local directory and inflate a customization as if it were the source without secrets decryption. And like if you did just that one thing and could get the code organization part of it, even just commenting that that's what you want in the forum would be productive. And if you have the skills to noodle around with it and try to make something like that work, or even just a POC of a bash script that sort of translates the Flux customize API and tries to do the same thing, would be helpful.
Sure. I'll go and have a look through your discussion boards and see where it's got to.
Yeah, we should try to get the discussion board post for this particular thing posted into the meeting notes as well. I will sift through that.
I'm just trying to find it. Any keywords you can remember?
I know Stefan and I both commented in it, I think.
Oh, that narrows it down. Oh, maybe it's this one, or this is one.
The other alternative approach that I could suggest is when you do this sort of manifest generation, do more upfront. Do it in CI, do it where you can review it in a pull request, like using a pre-processing tool like JSON. This is a bit more radical suggestion. It's not something that requires changes in Flux, but it is a tool you can lean on where you would be able to see the diffs of your rehydrated manifests before they're applied, potentially.
Yeah, and I think the manifest gen doc has a comment about how you can use some of the popular vendor style directories to ignore those diffs in reviews. Usually if the diff is large enough. Yeah, nice.
I think that is, well, it seems pertinent anyway, even if it's not the one you had in mind. I put that in the notes.
Thank you. I'll go and have a look. Kingdon has just reminded me of something else that is on our mind. What's the appetite in the future for something like a JSONic controller? So we use Customize a lot, but we also use JSONit a lot as well. And we're having some internal discussions at the moment as to, what's going to be our poison going forward. Is it going to still be customized? Is it still going to be JSONit? Is it going to be Helm? And we haven't decided yet, right? But it's feeding into the Flux V2 discussions for us internally, because that's customized right now. Obviously in V1, you could generate manifests with whatever you liked. They could be JSONit, they could whatever, right? You can't quite do that in V2. Now I appreciate that there are some kind of possibilities to use JSONit to generate some YAML, to generate the customize approach. But I was just curious to know what the project kind of feels like around, will you envisage one day that you will support something like a JSONic controller or similar?
So I think this is a great segue actually from the previous convo. With the way that we've built customized controller, it kind of owns two things, and I sort of wish that it didn't. Customized controller does non-trivial inflation of manifests and secrets decryption and like, you know, env subs stuff. This is manifest generation, right? But the really important stuff in customized controller is not related to manifest generation. It's about cataloging objects, applying them to the cluster, doing garbage collection, health checking, right? So I see that stuff actually is completely separate. And the fact that manifest generation and the apply controller portion are in the same thing is a little bit unfortunate to me. There would be like more overhead, but it's almost like if customized controller was producing an intermediate source, then that would really be factored quite cleanly. This is something that is not that hard to build if you have a arbitrary build system in Kubernetes already. So this is where I'm like kind of moving the conversation to when you think JSON at controller and kind of having the context of like repeatability and like maybe the fact that customized controller shouldn't be factored the way that it is, right? Just that piece that you want. How possible is it already to do with Flux and some very sensible extensions? So Flux and customized controller are capable of doing things from a bucket. If you can store a local bucket inside of Kubernetes, which you could run with like Minio pretty easily, it wouldn't even need to be durable necessarily. As long as it was reliable enough to hold around a source for a couple of reconcile periods, right? And then respin up and be recreated or something. Then you can have a controller or event-based response that takes your Git repository source, reads it from source controller over the network inside of the Flux system, and then does your template to the bucket. And from there, it's really easy to then chain customized controller on that bucket, right? And anytime that bucket ref would change, you know, you could simply have a monotonically increasing integer, or you could hash the results, and that's the bucket key. So there are some things there that are already possible that are not repo manifest generation. Of course, the repo manifest generation has some serious benefits because you kind of get a collaboration and diffing UI for free if you're willing to do that stuff with a makefile and developer work, like client-side workflow, or with a CI system that's showing you those diffs and maybe auto-committing them for you. So that's kind of like where things are at there. I was not part of like the kind of like original ideation of customized controller, and I'm not the decision maker on whether or not a change should go into customized controller. So that's kind of my outside opinion on state of things that apply stuff to the cluster when we think about a JSON controller. But somebody who has more of those responsibilities might have a different view or opinion. I don't know, what's your thoughts, Michael, or, you know, Santochi? Certainly we could ask.
I agree that it's slightly unfortunate factoring. I think the idea was in the early days of GitOps Toolkit was just to be very strident about using customize, like focusing on customize and plain YAMLs, because that's the sort of standard solution and you should never need anything else. And if you do need something else, then have an integration, which I think is, you know, that's a kind of defensible position to take in lots of ways, but does leave a few people out in the cold. That's certainly true.
I just would like to say is that we don't dislike your decision to go down the customized route. We're split in the team at the minute. I'm in the quite happy with customized camp, quite like it. But there are some team members who are very stuck with JSON implementations, and we're kind of having that battle at the moment. So yeah.
Is a makefile approach that commits those manifests working for you right now?
Yes, that's the happy medium that we have right now.
Do people not like that?
There's discussions about it at the moment.
Does it just feel second class or something? Because I almost think you have the better solution there. You get the diffs, and the UX for that in most diff tools is fairly good.
Yes.
I have another question for you, because it sounds like you're using both JSONet and Customize pretty heavily. I wonder if you've seen that there's a customized library, libsonnet, where you could pull some of the things. I really personally like the structure of Customize, and I learned a lot about it through this libsonnet while I was learning JSONet. And to be able to pull those things out, so just because those features of Customize controller are there, doesn't mean you need to use them if you have another interchangeable tool. And it might make a lot of sense to centralize all of the logic in CI. So this way you wouldn't lose the particular feature set of Customize while you transition to more JSONet.
I do know about that libsonnet implementation. I think it was you that actually managed to point me at it recently. I haven't tried it yet, though. It's actually one of those things that's on the list to try out. So thank you for reminding me of that one.
Yeah, I mean, if you wrote an OPA policy to prevent anyone from using the customization features, just like have very plain, health check prune kind of stuff going on, and then you moved all of your stuff to either CI side customize or JSONet with customized libsonnet, then you could get to that situation where you don't have to actually worry about having any sort of repeatable diff tool, since all of your directories are, the only thing you can't model is dependencies at that point, which it's not part of the MVP I thought of for the client side inflation. So that's like pretty much gets you right there already if you just stopped using that stuff.
I quite like the idea that I think probably came up quite a while ago of standardizing on a particular kind of artifact, say images, OCI images, and being able to sync from those. And therefore you can create those however you like. They're got some good properties about distribution and structure sharing. And then just refer to those as a source.
Did that come up earlier in this meeting?
Not earlier in this meeting, earlier in the world.
Okay.
Maybe last year or something.
Yeah.
Or I just thought of it, and I'm just imagining.
I'm very keen on making that happen. Adding OCI artifact unpack support to source controller.
Yeah, it's easy enough to implement union file system, and that's all you need. But yeah, that kind of is a bit of a halfway solution in the sense that you still need to do some work to create the pipeline to create the images, but at least the sort of steps are standard, if you like. The artifact is standard and it can be used for other purposes.
It feels quite natural though, because all of the reasons why the OCI stuff is already attractive. From a runtime perspective, from a CI perspective, it's the same thing, right? Usually exactly. The CI is going to have credentials. People understand how to do the pushes and pulls. So that's
yeah, exactly.
Would you use that, Dan? Would you push JSONet builds into an OCI image and then do Flux tag syncs from that?
The short answer is I don't think we would, but I don't know. I don't think we would.
Mm-hmm.
you'd rather go down the route of, say, if there's no JSON, a native JSON support of running it and then committing that back to Git, say? Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Would you be interested in like doing the JSON build in the cluster and stitching together with an in-cluster bucket?
Yeah, so I'm slightly intrigued by that approach of putting it in the bucket. I hadn't thought of that. It has kind of sparked an idea in my mind that I might go and try later.
Yeah, it's one of those mental backflips you can perform when you think about the Flux architecture a lot. Like, there's so many extension points. You can insert your own stuff in there and create really non-trivial pipelines.
Yes, I have to say, so the buckets, bucket sources is one bit of Flux v2 that I have yet to go and scratch the surface on. So
yeah, or I mean, you could host a cluster internal Git repo. It would be the same thing. Yeah. If you just wanted like a lightweight state store in there, you could have a pod that runs Git. You could even have a pod that runs like a small Git server like Git-T with a SQLite database. And that would actually have the benefit of having a web UI that you could port forward. So like you could, go look at the intermediate build there by just port forwarding the specific cluster, like local config Git server. And yeah, it doesn't even have to have a memory backing store as long as something's constantly writing to it or kind of checking up on it. But if you just back it with a PVC, if you have that luxury, it's going to be super cheap and reliable.
Okay, some ideas to try. Thank you. I have one more thing to show you, which is not a complaint, quite the opposite. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lens app. It's this. Are you guys familiar with this application? Okay, so
I've been using it more and more.
Ah, cool. So yeah, I really like it, and a few members in our team use it quite a lot. It kind of streamlines the process of getting like that bird's eye overview of your Kubernetes workflows. It's really cool. They have the capability to build your own extensions. And I thought actually it would be really nice to have a Lens extension, sorry, a Flux v2 extension, right? So I was kind of inspired by the work that's going on the Flux web UI at the moment. So very kind of similar, and this is very much just work in progress, just hacking around with the extension API. But the idea is that you have kind of visibility over each of the different resource types. So Git repositories, customizations, Helm releases, charts, repositories, etc., alerts. And then a lot of things you might want to do is you might just want to check, okay, what's the particular revision that I'm at right now? What's the current status of that? You may also want to actually kind of reconcile some of those resources. So at the moment, it just calls out to the terminal to kind of run that, just so I can get some feedback over what stages to reconcile at. You may decide that actually you want to suspend a particular resource. So I just wanted to kind of drop that into your minds at the moment, in that I'm having a play with this at the moment, and I was hoping to kind of stick it up on GitHub at some point later this week, and then I'll probably share it around. It may be useful, for people if they use Lens. So
definitely.
Dan, thank you so much for showing this. This is awesome.
It's made my life a little bit easier, because so I spend so much time getting sucked into kubectl, and at the same time I'm now having to do Flux, blah, 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 whereas I just kind of want to click some buttons. So
yeah, because there's already the custom resource view, right, with the individual. Can you just open up, right? It's the generic one. You have to like find the source toolkit APIs.
I know, and it was driving me nuts having to dig through different submenus.
And it's like, generic, right? So you don't get those custom verbs like suspend and reconcile.
No, but by adding the capability on, so adding the menu options, you can now kind of do that. So I was hoping you could do that. Maybe if I pick a source. Yeah, you can now do that on the custom resource.
Oh, that's wild. So it even
Yeah.
works from the CR view. But
Exactly.
why would you do that when you have the Flux view? That's so much better.
Exactly. And yeah, so it's very much just a hack at the moment. I kind of had a vague idea of that you could have like an overview screen that is similar to what you've done with the Grafana dashboard. I don't know, just ideas at the minute.
Interesting.
I think that's,
yeah, you could put some information here about like what controllers are enabled, and
yeah, so
maybe
you know,
href or a iframe, like a Grafana dashboard here.
yeah, although so there's going to be an update to the Lens extension API, which will allow you to kind of reuse a lot of their existing structure around pulling data out of Prometheus. So we could have some pretty graphs or some widgets or some stuff anyway, just to kind of give you an overview of how many controllers you've got running, you know.
So there are a bunch of user stories in the Flux read-only UI project that are about, like, if you click into a customization, it shows you kind of what objects are from the catalog. Those queries are done with a label selector, and then the catalog is just a list of the group kinds that you should be label selecting on for that customization. That kind of stuff. I'm just thinking of other exciting ways that this kind of plugin could add value. We also have a bunch of user stories. I wrote them down for a VS Code plugin, which would be nearly similar. This is super exciting.
Yeah, I was thinking something along the lines of, similar to what you've done in the web UI, which is some sort of graph that showed you, okay, what objects have come out of a particular customization, for example.
Yeah, even just being able to go to a customization and then see that it references another object and then click that object to actually go to it. Right.
Exactly, right. And you've already got all of the kind of infrastructure in place within Lens to be able to kind of dig into those workflows anyway. So
I don't know if Lens has like navigation per se, like a browser has like a navigation history. I don't know if it has that concept, but
no, I don't think it does.
But you could probably bring up a sub view that could be contextualized within a customization, maybe, or something. Yeah, all of these UIs have kind of different paradigms on how they represent the info, but you've made me so excited because I've thought about these problems a lot, and they are hard to work on, and you have to take the time to pick up the skill set to. Have you built a Lens plugin before? You just messed around?
No. Well, I have now. I've built half a dozen simply because this inspired me to go, this is actually really quite easy. I think the easiest thing for me to do is just get it to a point where I can commit version 0.1, stick it on GitHub, and then share it out, and then see what ideas come from that. It's probably the easiest thing, you know.
Fascinating.
For me, very happy to amplify that signal.
Yes.
So actually, I have to be honest, it came up because I think one of the Lens contributors did go into the discussions on V2 and say, hey, we've got this extension API. We'd love to see a contribution. And I just spotted that and kind of, I had the itch at that point. So,
how do people install these plugins?
They are published as a tar archive, and then you can just reference the tar archive.
So you would just go to the plugins GitHub release page and then...
Yeah, so inside Lens, you just pass it the path to a tar archive. Yep. So my expectation is I'm just going to be publishing one on a repository somewhere.
Yes.
They stick a URL in here, it's installed. Currently, it's just run off a local one. So
yeah, I mean, certainly if you want to keep governance of that repo for now, there are some things that can make it easier for it to, be more adopted by the community later on, like just picking an APL2 license and, being mindful of security.
Yeah, I had another feature. I don't think I can show it to you now, but so it's very similar, I think.
Just as a point of order, we've gone about 10 minutes over time.
I'm done.
Don't even know if I should.
And
be
I think
recording.
if I leave the meeting and I have to go, then it might end the meeting.
If you give me host, and then you click the button that says allow others to keep talking.
Oh yeah,
then-
Found it. I found
yeah.
it.
Let's
Cool.
try that. Hang on. Make host.
I don't know if you're doing a local recording though. That will end.
No, it's recording to cloud.
Yeah, if it's recording
So-
to cloud, then it should be fine.
That'll still work.
Yep.
Okay.
And then
I'm gonna
you
drop
should
out
be
then.
able to leave and just click the right one.
Yeah, it looks. Did I need to do an extra thing, Lee? I made you host, and it's
Yeah.
recording, and the recording thing is by your name. So I think
Brilliant.
we're good if I just.
Yep.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
showing
Michael.
us all this stuff, Dan. It's very cool.
That's right. Yeah, I'll try and get it into a usable state and then throw it out and see where it goes. So,
Brilliant. All right. Okay, I'm going to drop out. See you all.
cheers. The only other quick feature that came to mind was I figured it might be nice if you could literally install Flux from Lens. So you go to a brand new cluster and you just want to install the controllers, the CRDs, and the RBAC definitions, right? So you can kind of do that at the moment. So if I'm probably going to regret uninstalling this on this cluster, but I will. The idea is that, yeah, if you've got a new cluster, you can come along, click install, and it will. You can set everything up from with inside Lens. Maybe useful.
Wow, you can uninstall Flux from here as well. Okay.
Yeah,
Assuming
I'm
you
probably
had
gonna
you could do
yeah,
an RBAC check to see if you have the permission to do that.
Yeah.
Also, that should probably have a confirmation box there.
Yeah, I honestly don't know what state this is in right now. I haven't touched this for a few days, so I don't know. I'm probably going to regret uninstalling it off that particular cluster right now. But hey, for the sakes of a demo.
Certainly, if you wanted to demo the install, you could create like a K3D or kind cluster right now, and that would take a handful of seconds.
Yeah, I probably should have done that. I can actually do that very quickly.
Yeah, do you have K3D? That
Yeah, I've got
time to
kind of
cluster.
yeah.
Is this the new version of kind that Ben just released?
Yeah, this, is this 11? No, I think this is still 10. I haven't gone for 11 just yet.
Just kind of curious. Yeah, I haven't upgraded either.
I might do that later. Although I think there was maybe a problem mentioned on Slack, so I might wait. I've got no use for it just yet.
Yeah, lately I've been using K3D. It's about twice as fast to get you a cluster up, but it also does come with a bunch of extra stuff. And there's a small caveat, which is like when you get your control plane, not all of your components are necessarily running, but that's been a pretty good experience for doing things. So that's why I kind of ask about the kind version, because I haven't touched it in a second.
I have no idea if this will succeed, but
The metric stack there, is that the Flux metric stack?
no, this is, so Lens gives you an option to install a very basic Prometheus stack from within Lens, but so that's mainly for people that just don't have any Prometheus installations at all, and they just want to have the graphs. So
I had no idea that there was this features section of cluster management in Lens. That's interesting. Could you put forms and stuff here for the install?
Yeah. So
you technically could bootstrap a repo from something like this screen, although maybe you'd want to do it somewhere else.
Yeah. So that was my initial take. So I was thinking along the same lines, but what I might do for that is target Lens v5. So this is Lens version 4. I don't know if you're aware, but there's version 5 coming. It's currently a beta release. And a lot of this changes, and they've made this kind of implementation a lot more powerful. So you could have a form that says, hey, I want to bootstrap a particular cluster. So very much replicating what we do with Flux bootstrap command, right? That could be quite interesting. The downside of what I've done at the moment is that I've literally just picked a version 12 or something of the manifests and stuck them inside my extension, which is great, but that's not going to be great long term. So I'm hoping to kind of get to a point where I can kind of include some of the extra bells and whistles in V5. But just an example, so
no worries and
July
no
does,
rush.
right?
I clicked install, and there you go. All of my controllers are now starting to come alive. I think, there you go, they're up and running. So in theory, I'm now in a position where I could just go and start creating Git resources or repositories rather and customizations, and everything would just burst into life, right?
You could paste in an SSH key secret, and then hook up a Git repo and do your thing.
So Lens currently doesn't have, Lens doesn't have the capability to create new resources from inside it just yet, but I was thinking I might add that as the capability through the extension, because I quite like the idea of being able to create the Git repository from inside Lens. It'd be quite nice.
Oh, you can't create custom resources, but you can create other ones.
No, so you couldn't come along, for example, and not that I'm aware of anyway. So if you wanted to say create a new deployment, you couldn't create a new deployment unless you click this one that I totally forgot about. Okay, you can, but you have to write them out.
It's not like a form.
Yeah, so I like the idea of like just being able to, we know what a customization is going to look like. So you could have some sort of pretty form that says, okay, what's the path?
Is there any kind of like autocomplete happening here? Like if you write kind :
no.
Yeah, that is a bit unfortunate. That it's not a better IDE.
I think that's been referenced in Lens projects, so there may be some updates coming to that in the future. So
yeah, so the thing that Lens probably won't have unless we build a significant plugin for it and the IDE infrastructure for it becomes better is it's not going to have like the ability to browse a Git repository, a local one, right? It's not going to have like code navigation and like that sort of, maybe it'll have autocomplete for Kubernetes resources. So you will reach a limitation where some of maybe the higher order things you could do with a Flux plugin, those are the kinds of things that we've been thinking about for the VS Code kind of target. The unfortunate thing is that from a Kubernetes client perspective, things like Lens and Octant and even K9s are much more powerful Kubernetes clients. They're more modern than the current VS Code Kubernetes extension, which is a single cluster thing that only looks at some specific APIs. So like you can build VS Code extensions like that with the limitation that you're kind of hooked up to one cluster at a time. But some of the powerful things you could do there, right, is you've got the context of a Git repository checked out, like maybe even a workspace, several Git repositories or arbitrary folders from some source control system, most likely. And with all of the file caching and parsing infrastructure within VS Code, it would be very feasible to say, look at a customized catalog, do an intermediary query for all of the objects for the customization, and then navigate to the file in the repo that represents that object. So that kind of thing is just never going to be done with something that doesn't promise to be like a code editor.
Yeah. The thing is, so Lens is, just because, yeah, the thing is though, you don't necessarily, so like the user of a lens may not be someone that necessarily has access to the repository. So
yes, they might. So it's a different persona, more of an operational one. So the things that, yeah, but I'm just making you aware of some use cases that are quite unique. I think that because these Kubernetes UIs come from an operator context where there is no standard way of working on the configuration of the cluster, right? Like they don't have agreed upon interfaces that are all of the GitOps stuff, right? Then you end up with solutions like these object viewers, right? That then can also directly mutate stuff with the Kubernetes API, which is about the smallest thing that you can build. But when you look at these APIs from a GitOps context, like the structures that we have in source controller allow you to associate the things that you could be working with on your laptop with the things that are inside the cluster. And I think that that ability to bring the cluster context back to the editor workflow to where the person does the git push is going to be the long-term goal for improving the GitOps developer experience. So it's just some stuff that I've kind of been working with in the back of my head and talking with some of the VS Code folks. And maybe there are other places where that kind of stuff can happen with like Vim plugins or certainly VS Code is the most popular editor out there right now. I meet college students who are using it all the time.
yeah, I mean, look, I'm using it myself.
Yes.
So right.
Yeah. No. But I think that we should explore, you know, how useful, like however useful we can make the Flux plugin for these object viewers. It is a step, many steps in the right direction. And I'm so excited about the fact that you did this, and I almost feel inclined to, like, as soon as you get it out there in a usable state, to like put it somewhere in the Flux documentation, because people are very hungry for these kinds of user interfaces. Like when folks see the Flux command line tool, we're very aware that that is a very empowering experience for some developers to know, hey, I have the CLI tool I can script around.
Mhm.
And for other people, it is a, fear, uncertainty, and doubt kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is amazing. You've touched so many pieces of the user experience.
Yeah, so actually one of the things I wasn't sure about at the moment, like, was if with this lens extension, whether I should make it dependent on the Flux CLI or not. And I haven't decided whether I should or not yet, right? So you could feasibly use this extension and lens without the Flux CLI, right? So currently for a reconcile, I just call out to the Flux binary. But actually you could just go and patch the annotation, right? Directly via the Kubernetes API, and you don't have to use the CLI. I wasn't sure what approach to take just yet.
Is there
I think
a in-between option? That sounds better. The
It does, right? Yeah.
API that we expose, or is that the Kubernetes API? I'm not exactly sure how that structure shakes out in practice.
Sorry, what I missed it.
Is
Pingin, what'd you say?
like a public Go client package for Flux, or is that not a thing?
Are you building the extension in Go, Dan?
No, it's TypeScript.
Yeah, so I suppose that wouldn't. There's no code sharing that can happen. So I would be inclined to say that it's attractive to not have the binary dependency. Now there are things like suspend and reconcile, where those are trivial API operations.
Yep.
We are thinking of adding things like Flux tree to the command line. And if it makes your life easier to have a binary dependency and then read some machine readable output into a TypeScript object, then that seems, like a
How are you
a good way to not have bugs, right?
True. How would you this Flux tree? How would you expose that back to the CLI? So when I was initially digging through, I was like, oh, how do you actually do the reconcile? And I initially thought, oh, maybe you've got some endpoint on the controllers that you're calling through a proxy. And it wasn't until I actually read that actually it's just an annotation. So do you have intentions to kind of start exposing some sort of APIs through the controllers or not?
No, it's an intentional design choice that all of the information is exposed in a Kubernetes native way. This is important because you maintain the storage and primarily security model of the Kubernetes API. This is the most sacred portion of the design.
Sweet. That's good.
The reason why we don't have an API or like that fancy user interface yet is because we have made the explicit decision to do all of Flux through the Kubernetes API natively. So every part of Flux is extensible in the Kubernetes way. And it's auditable, and you can drive policy on it and restrict permissions, all Kubernetes API machinery in RBAC. So hopefully, I'm sure that's clear to you with the current state of the project, but that is like a guiding design decision. And I do believe in the ability for Kubernetes to scale in that regard. The kinds of choices that we've made, like with cataloging objects, reduces the amount of configuration that we need to write back to etcd to the point where a single Flux management cluster could likely manage a large number of Kubernetes clusters, each with their own ridiculous amount of scale. And there are some other choices that we could make in the future to help you shard out configuration or shard out the runtime of those controllers once we hit those scaling limits. But I don't think that the right answer is to copy data and minify it into caches and stores and write our own endpoints around it. That is a solution that other projects are taking that I think is just not worth the trade-offs that I value. And I think some of the other maintainers and many of the users of the Flux project would probably agree with that it's a huge differentiating factor that keeps. So I would say that we shouldn't ever kind of have those ancillary APIs. The UI has a sort of like Go server interface, but that runs locally. I believe you can deploy it to the cluster, and some of that is for the pragmatism of like the front end that Jordan wrote.
I use the web UI as kind of inspiration, but I'm keeping an eye on that. The only thing I wasn't sure about was how you would kind of host that UI somewhere and handle how do you actually.
I think
it's the same thing as the Kubernetes dashboard had, right?
In a way, yeah, the kube dashboard has a default role and you can escalate it by supplying your own credentials.
Yes.
And then like the Flux UI, Jordan's messing around with a way to deploy it in the cluster right now. Is the last update that I kind of got. I know that there's some of that working a little bit, but to have kind of the primary model just be client side is the thing that makes this the most sense to me, because it's the easiest way for somebody to have their own permissions.
Yes.
With all of the different ideas about tracing sources back to their actual Git and doing a tree of dependencies that you've been explaining to me, this is the best reason to lean into that MVP requirement and make it an explicitly client-side tool like Lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that that is like with that goal in sight, you absolutely need a client, a smart client that has credentials and things like that. And you don't want a proxy for, you know, the thing that authorizes you to talk to Kubernetes. Most of that challenge is just sometimes you have binary dependencies in order to authenticate and stay authenticated to a Kubernetes cluster. And those things just don't make sense from a browser context at the moment.
Yes, there's an example for us, which is we're assuming roles here, there, and everywhere to be able to communicate with the Kubernetes clusters and AWS. So
I'm envisioning a future where it takes me 30 seconds to load the web page, and then it caches a WebAssembly built version of gcloud that then authenticates me to the Kubernetes cluster in my browser. Okay, so yeah, kind of I would say, yeah, for trivial things, like you could continue to try and use the Kubernetes API. I don't think it's a crime to use a binary dependency. Potentially, there are features that are going into the Flux CLI, like actual data structure type features that would be non-trivial to implement and would likely be bug prone and have maintenance toil if you try to continue implementing them client side in TypeScript inside of your extension. So unless you could do code sharing with Go somehow, maybe having a binary dependency on the Flux CLI and then relying on some structured output flags would be a better way to do that kind of thing. When you start talking about some of the really non-trivial work that we've done with Flux install and Flux bootstrap, I would say that having a binary dependency on the Flux CLI would be a good thing. For the type of user that is going to have Lens, those are probably fine trade-offs. And as long as the Flux CLI is always past the config of the Lens client that's actually acting on the thing, that sounds really reasonable to me. One caveat I can think of is I am a Windows user. I think you might be as well.
Nope, this is Mac.
Oh, you're using a Mac. Okay. Yeah, I'm on Windows and I don't have the Flux build of the Windows CLI or the Windows build of the Flux CLI on my machine.
I hadn't even considered that. Is there one? I don't know.
Yes, there is. I could probably also just symlink it to my WSL2 environment or something. I could make the Windows exec actually exec inside of Linux. Anyway, there's just little things like that for people who have strange environments on Windows when they're primarily using WSL. Like all my Kubernetes stuff usually happens in there, and then I just copy my kube configs out to the host. Docker for desktop, which most people will also have installed, comes with its own build of kubectl. So there's a Windows kubectl that's installed when people have Docker for desktop.
Yeah, so this is what Lens does as well, is that it will grab a kubectl.
Oh, okay. So you'll have a kubectl binary dependency.
Yeah, you have two options in Lens. So by the default is it will pull down a kubectl dependency. It will actually do multiple. So it will grab one for each version of the cluster that it can find. So if you've got a .20 cluster, it'll get a kubectl.20. If you've got a .116 cluster, it will also go and get kubectl 116. So
that's nice.
Yeah.
So does Lens use kubectl for actions on the Kubernetes API then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's TypeScript execing out to kubectl.
Exactly.
Okay.
So everything is kind of going through that same conduit of kubectl, kubeconfig, which is what I kind of really like, because if it's really easy then to debug, right?
If you end up supporting a bootstrap form or even just an install form, I would almost say have the binary dependency and don't worry about doing anything through the Kubernetes API through kubectl.
So yeah, I haven't. There's definitely some trade-offs, right? It's going to give us a lot of features. The only thing I'm a little bit cautious around is how to kind of maintain or be in step with all the different releases. And if
The
there are any,
versioning.
yeah, exactly. So Flux check right now will tell you if your local copy of your local binary is different to what version you've got deployed. So kind of, I just need to think through some of the different scenarios that will kind of.
There might be some library functions that Lens is already using for the Kubernetes stuff. We use the same kind of semver and versioning policies as Kubernetes, and so a lot of that logic will probably apply. You could probably just copy and paste it into a Flux version comparator and binary puller.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking, was along those lines of just pull in a Flux binary. So
interesting.
but also giving the user the option as well to override that. So if they've got kubectl on their path and they want to use that, so I do personally use the kubectl that's in my path because I have different use cases. So that's it.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah, well, if you want to do any more consultation on this, if you want pair programming help, I do know JavaScript. I'm not as versed with TypeScript, but I did a lot of JavaScript development before.
I think the onus is on me now is just to get it into a more usable state, share the code somewhere, and then go from there.
There may also be somebody from Microsoft this summer. They're looking at getting an intern to work on the VS Code stuff, and Lens could also be a good place for that person to have some context, at least either learn from what you did with the extension, or maybe contribute some parallel features.
Cool.
So yeah, like hopefully they get somebody who's really zazzed about front end. Is apparently they don't know anything about the intern that they hired for their team. Which is weird to me, but yeah, so cool.
Awesome.
Great. Well, Dan, do you know how to reach me? My handle is StealthyBox in most places, or sometimes it's Kapili.
Yeah, I assume that you're on the Cloud Native Slack workspace, and there's also the Kubernetes GitOps one as well. So I hang out on the Flux Cloud Native channel. So yeah, that's kind of where I was going to publish this at some point. So
great. Okay. Sweet. Well, there's lots of work and areas of innovation that can happen in UI with GitOps, and what you have done on your own accord to solve your own problems is totally something that other people should be using. And I'm happy to be involved and get you in touch with other people. Like we have, great UI and designer folks at Weaveworks. Potentially there are other folks with the different people represented on the core maintenance team, other people in the community who could probably connect up and help and contribute. This could turn into something really cool. So
yeah, that's my. So I'm a little bit cautious at the moment. I just want at this point to say is like let's just do an MVP, which is suspend, reconcile, resume, and also just showing the resources. But I can definitely envisage that there will then be loads of ideas that come out of that. And I think at that point, once it's easier just to say, right, here's the code, here's the GitHub repository. If you've got suggestions, put them in the issue list, and then we can approach it that way. And yeah, I think there is so much potential for it. So just see where it goes.
Yeah, even that template feature that we were just talking about in this meeting, maybe that makes less sense in Lens. Although it could, it could show you the template at a minimum, right? And like just be like, you want to template this customization, what directory should I use? And then it outputs it. And maybe that's useful. I'd see that maybe again more useful in the VS Code kind of context, right? Because you would get a temporary file that you could diff and stuff. But
yeah, I take it the VS Code side is there's nothing concrete out there just yet, or is there anything that I can?
No, I have a bunch of user stories that we should probably put in a public place.
Okay.
But again, there was the the possibility of an intern making that their summer project. So that's just kind of why that's been happening in a back channel instead of where it should be in this
Sure.
public conversation.
Cool.
So great.
Well,
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, cheers, Dan. It was great to meet you. Feel free to, just reach back out to the community as you make progress on this and want more involvement. I'm personally happy to help a little bit. So
awesome. Thank you very much. All right. Good to meet you.
Cheers. Take care of yourself. Bye.
Bye.